Welcome to Wellsprings of Faith. My name is Father Jürgen Liias. I am a Roman Catholic priest. I'm a senior priest on the staff of St. Patrick's Church in Stoneham, which is the neighboring community to Melrose, where we tape our program. Our show, Wellsprings of Faith, looks at a person's faith, their life's journey and faith, and the fruit of that faith in their lives and in the life of our world. I want to welcome today a dear friend who's become a dear friend over these last couple of years, Deacon Tom O'Shea. He is a deacon on the staff of the Roman Catholic churches in Linfield. They're called Ave Maria Parish and comprises two churches there. And he's been with me these last couple of years on pilgrimages, first to the Holy Land, and we just recently got back from a wonderful pilgrimage in the footsteps of St. Paul and St. John in Greece. So that's been a good way to get to know him, to drink with him and eat with him and worship with him and hear you preach. And so it's been a wonderful thing to get to know you these last couple of years. Yeah. So this program is about your journey in faith. So go back as far as you can remember to talk about your relationship to God.
Well, I go back as far as I remember. So I was raised in this area. I was raised in, my family's originally from Peabody, my dad's family. Okay. My mom's from Scranton, outside Scranton. They were all coal miners, but both of them were very devout Catholics. And we lived for a while in West Peabody, which is probably my first memories of church and of actually causing disruption there was a little spring-loaded rocket that came in some cereal I had, and I smuggled it into St. Adelaide's. We're talking about 1964 or something like that. Shot it off, sent it up, and then went back to the crying room and was banished there for a while. So that's
how old were you?
I don't know.
Like maybe 2 or 3?
Oh no, maybe 4 or 5. I was the oldest of 3 boys, and it was very difficult for my poor mom. And one time she went to mass, and if you know that church, it's right on a busy street, Lowell Street. And so she's got the 3 of us. She's dragging us into church, and my brother Brian breaks loose and bolts into the street. I break loose and run down the aisle. And apparently what I did say was, "Good morning, God." And she decided to go for my brother because he was the one in danger. Meanwhile, she's holding the child, my other brother, who was an infant at that time. So the kind of, those memories come back. But I think it was, I had a pretty traditional Catholic upbringing in the late 60s, early 70s, and I was an altar server. We then moved to Linfield, where I was an altar server at one of the churches that I'm a deacon at right now.
Oh, really?
So we have parishioners who remember that and still call me Tommy.
Tommy,
even though I'm 62 years old. So, there was a moment when the pastor at the time, Father Shinnick, asked me if I was interested in becoming a priest. And I had gone to St. John's Prep, and I had had a really great education under the Zavarian brothers, several of whom actually live here in Melrose. I thought about it, but I really wanted to go off to college and have a family. So,
as you think back of those years, it's like at St. John's Prep. Was it sort of a formal Catholic education, or did you remember moments yourself of kind of spiritual awakening or some sense of the reality of God beyond, obviously, the church's ritual and prayers and all?
Well, I think the teachers I had at St. John's Prep at that time, they wove faith into everything. So I had an English teacher who would often talk about literature, but talk about religious elements in the literature. I had a Spanish teacher who made us memorize the Our Father and Hail Mary in Spanish, which we said it. And so she would work, the history of the church in Spain and Latin American. So it was always part of the environment that I grew up in. It's the air I breathe. And so I never really ever had any problems doubting the existence of God. You often hear people, maybe losing their faith. I think I was just so enmeshed in it and just raised in it that it was part of who I am.
Was that true too? Your home life too?
My dad was a go to mass kind of practical Catholic, right? I mean, he was not. My father was a pediatrician. He was a very intelligent man, but he wasn't an intellectual. And my mother, on the other hand, she was a nurse and a nurse practitioner, and she But she was a very devout woman, and she would read deeply, in particularly Carmelite spirituality.
Interesting.
She was a third order Discalced Carmelite, which is an association of lay people who promised to, live the charism of the Carmelite nuns and priests. And so she read people like Teresa of Avila, Teresa of Lisieux, John of the Cross, really deep mystical thinkers. And I think my mother was a mystic. She would have experiences that she would try to share with her 3 sons and her husband, and unfortunately not getting very far with it. But I was open to it, so I would become aware of some of these things, and she'd say, well, I'm not going to tell your father about that. He'll just get upset.
Well, it's interesting, obviously as a new Catholic, relatively new now, it's been 10 years, one of the things I've discovered is there are all these organizations or sodalities and fellowships like the Third Order, Discalced Carmelites, and there's just a lot, the caricature from Protestants is, well, Catholics are all nominal, they just, and they're not, they don't know Jesus and they don't have a relationship. And there's a little bit of truth to that sometimes, but I found that the real spiritual energy and vitality in the church is, there's this enormous numbers of very committed Catholics, and they live their life. They do go to Mass, and they do the regular Catholic things, but then they have this deepening faith that's expressed in all kinds of other ways in these fellowships. And
yeah, there's people think of Catholicism as a monolithic faith with one sort of way of being Catholic, and I teach in the program for the formation of deacons, and I do teach a class where I try to show them, there's Benedictine spirituality, Carthusian, Trappist spirituality, Salesian spirituality, Franciscan spirituality, Ignatian spirituality, Carmelites. There's all sorts of ways.
Yeah, I always like to say it's all the denominations, but you're in communion with each other as opposed to Protestants.
Just different ways of kind of experiencing God. And we all have different constitutions. God made us differently, right? So you may experience God differently from the way your prayer life, you may be more attuned to a certain type of prayer than I am. So I really think that, Catholics should explore that.
Yeah, and it's so rich. So back to you. So we got you at St. John's Prep, and you never wandered from the faith, so to speak, or rebelled against it or lost it, but
no, but I wasn't always a well-behaving Catholic.
You were.
The mind tells you one thing, but let's not forget, I was a young man who liked girls.
In the 60s? I mean, by now we're in the 80s.
Late 70s, early 80s, right? And so I went away to college, and I had fun at college. I'll just leave it at that. But I was a philosophy major at Harvard. So I got into this, studying in an environment where, not everyone was a theist, not everyone was a believer. And so that was kind of an interesting experience. And even in that environment, I can't say I lost my faith in God at all. Maybe I was challenged by certain teachings in the Catholic Church, for sure. And I think most people who still are Catholics, I say if you're not struggling with some of the teachings, you're just not, you're not thinking. Right. And so I never really lost my faith. I won't say that, I was a member of the Catholic Student Center. I, went irregularly, but I did go. And my faith was always important to me. I looked in certain different other areas. I studied different religions, some of the Eastern religions, and found some interesting ideas there. But, at the end of it all, I really feel like being Catholic is who I am. For me to be something else would be.
I suppose, in majoring in philosophy, obviously, that's, on one hand, that's an enormously rich component of Catholicism. And on the other hand, obviously, particularly in the last couple of centuries, philosophy has also been the primary critic of religious faith.
Since the Enlightenment, most Western philosophy has been antagonistic, to say the least, to Catholicism.
In the last couple of centuries.
But at the same time, there are a lot of believing philosophers, and one of the things Pope Leo XIII in the 19th century said, we've got to get back to teaching philosophy in our seminaries. So, as you probably know, if you study to become a priest nowadays, you take a year's worth of philosophy before you even touch theology.
It's an enormous gap in my own life as a Protestant, because that was not present at all in the preparation for Protestant ministry.
Pope John Paul II was a brilliant philosopher.
Right.
And he wrote an encyclical called Faith and Reason, Fides et Ratio, and he talks about the importance of thinking, right, reason, as well as faith, and how the two go together. And that's the other thing. I think people nowadays feel like, for example, if you're a scientist, you can't believe in God. Like somehow these are inconsistent things, and they really aren't.
No.
The idea that there's a good God that's created a rational world is really foundational to the scientific project itself, right? So I find that, a lot of people in science can't answer a lot of questions that the human heart asks, right? Like, why are we here? What's right? What's wrong? These are all religious questions.
That's right.
Yeah,
and it's interesting. I was listening to a podcast not too long ago about science and faith questions, and this was Father Robert Spitzer. I don't know.
Yes,
he's kind
absolutely.
of a brilliant
He's
mind.
a Jesuit,
Yeah. But he was saying it's quite interesting that, first of all, the vast majority of scientists, if you actually do a poll on them, believe in God. It's not like this idea that all scientists are atheists or something like that. But also, he noticed that there's been an emerging among younger scientists, a lot more faith among younger scientists. And part of that is where the science itself is going, particularly in terms of advanced quantum physics and all that stuff, which opens itself up to the reality of a much more complex and interesting
paradoxical
universe. And they're just the kind of materialistic universe. And then there's also these other research, like on near-death experiences, which is opening the eyes of it's sort of science itself proving at least some of the tenets we believe, like the possibility of life after death and things like that.
Absolutely.
So you survived Harvard.
I
And you neither lost your faith or your soul, I guess.
No, I had a great experience. So I don't want to. People make fun of Harvard and they caricature it, and it may be different now than when I was there. I don't know, but I got out of there and had made some great friends that I have to this day. And
I remember when I was around that era, a dear friend who was one of the early guests on this show. I forgot her first name's Kelly. She ran the Veritas Institute, which was a thing to try to claim the original truth of, the logo of,
which is objective truth
of Harvard Veritas, and to really do some excellent work on proclaiming the faith at Harvard as the fulfillment of reason, not the antithesis of reason.
So I got out of there, and I actually thought I wanted to be a physician like my dad, so I spent a year in medical school, but I realized that wasn't for me. And
Where'd
I
you
left,
go to med school?
UMass, out in Worcester. And then I just went into the business world, and I first worked in high tech. I worked as a product manager, so that's the role where you develop products and services and try to figure out what should be in a product, how it should be priced, how it should be sold.
And like what kind of product? What fee? What?
Well, I worked on spreadsheets.
Oh.
I worked, probably the company people would know is Lotus 123, although that's ancient technology. I brought that up to some young people I was working with a few years ago, and they're like, well, what's Lotus 123? It's like talking about the Model T to somebody who drives a modern car, So I worked on spreadsheets and worked on Lotus Symphony, which is a type of spreadsheet. And then I got hired. Got my MBA at night at Boston College, got interested in finance, and I gravitated towards that industry, got registered as a broker and started to work for a small brokerage firm. And then I was hired into Fidelity, where I went to be part of the team that built the internet for Fidelity in the mid-90s. So that combination of technology and finance. And then I spent about 15 years at Fidelity. And after that, I went and worked in a consulting firm that consulted to the financial services industry.
I see. And meanwhile, you got married, and you
got married to
your
a beautiful
rejection of the priesthood. But
yes,
you're not sorry, right?
No,
I met your wife.
You've met my
beautiful,
lovely wife. You know she
woman.
keeps me in line. I think.
Yeah. And you have children?
I have 2 children, 2 adult children. Molly, who's married to Luke, they live in Reading, and our first grandchild they had in January, and then my son Tommy, who is a surgical resident down in D.C.
So your father's...
yeah, my dad still had an impact on my son.
But it's funny, I was just talking the other day, who was it? John McGinnis, and he brought up your dad.
Yeah, John.
He had quite a reputation in Peabody.
Oh, we could do a whole story. He was a character.
Yeah.
He was a big character, my dad.
He made a point of saying that.
And but John was my chaplain when I was at Harvard the last few years.
Oh, that's right.
So,
you mentioned that to me too.
He's a great priest.
Yeah.
But so I got married, had kids, and I think I
always just practiced your Catholicism.
Yeah. I think when you have a family, you start to think about your faith a little differently, and I see this in the families that I deal with who are baptizing, having their children baptized. Now I've got to pass something on. I need to really re-engage in a much more serious way. So, to be a good example to my children and help them make sense of the world the way my parents did. And so, we went to Mass regularly. At Mass, I was paying for the sins that I committed when I was a child by making sure my kids were trying to pay attention. But I think probably about 14 years ago, I sort of felt called to become a deacon. And it's hard to explain other than that I knew a couple deacons, and I had studied, I read about them, went online, learned more, and I couldn't get it out of my head. So I finally said to my wife, I would like to become a deacon. And she said, "What's that?" Deacons have been around for a while, but they've only sort of been reinstituted recently.
Yeah, I mean, it's a wonderful, one of the really positive things of Vatican II was the re-emergence of the permanent diaconate, as we call it. This was true in the Episcopal Church, where I was a priest too.
Is that also the case in the Episcopal too?
Yeah. There was no permanent diaconate. You were a deacon it was a transitional stage between being a lay person and a priest. You could be a deacon I was a deacon, I think, for 6 months.
So that's what had happened. The diaconate had been pretty robust as a ministry, starting from the Bible.
Yeah, from Acts
chapter 6, where they're created by the apostles. All the way till probably about the 4th or 5th century, when the presbyterate became more important, and then the diaconate became just a transitional point.
Right. So that was really the end of a permanent diaconate. There were some.
There were some. They were here and there. St. Francis was a deacon.
That's right.
He never wanted to be a priest.
And that was his own choice.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. There were a few deacons here and there, but it wasn't until Vatican II that the Council Fathers decided they wanted to reinstitute it as a permanent ministry. Yeah,
and I think it's been one of the richest changes, both in the Anglican and Catholic Church, and the significant presence of deacons in the ministry of the church. So what drew you to it?
I think what drew me to it was the idea of service, which is really what a deacon is primarily supposed to be. A lot of Catholics see deacons on the altar, assisting the priest, proclaiming the gospel. In every Mass, if there's a deacon there, he reads the gospel. The Pope could show up tomorrow at one of our churches, and I would be the one who reads the gospel, right? And preaching. So people see that, but what they don't realize is it's really a ministry of service, and that's what I was really attracted to. Deacon comes from the Greek word diakonos, which means servant, right? So we're meant to serve. We do have a liturgical role. So we talk about the 3 munera of the deacon, the 3 areas which the deacon's responsible. So one is proclaiming the gospel and preaching the word, so the munera of the word. Liturgy, we baptize. We can officiate at weddings, so preside at weddings. We're involved in graveside funerals in funeral homes and all that stuff. So we can't consecrate the Eucharist we can't hear confession. Or people, I say to people, I can hear your confession, I just can't absolve you of your sins. So
you're still stuck
if
in
you
your
want to
sins.
confess to me, that's fine. I just can't help you get anywhere beyond that. But and then but the most important aspect is this area of service.
Yeah.
You know, make sure you're taking the gospel out to people who are on the margins, people in nursing homes, people who are sick, to the poor, to the disenfranchised, and
of course, that was the origin in the Acts
Absolutely.
of the Apostles. The soup kitchen was causing problems.
Yeah, well, basically what was going on, if you read Acts
Yeah.
chapter 6, you can frame this up and imagine what's going on. It was very important to take care of widows in those days, right? Because there was no social security or social services. And so the early Christian church would distribute food and material things to the widows. And the Greek-speaking widows were angry because they felt that the local Aramaic and Hebrew-speaking widows were getting treated better, all right? So you can imagine the apostles sitting there, these angry Greek-speaking widows coming up to them and saying, we're not getting treated as well as they are. And they just said, wait a minute.
This sounds like a parish church.
We've got a lot to do. Find 7 men of a good reputation, bring them to us, and we'll help them resolve this problem. So it was the first sort of big delegation of responsibility, and so those were the first 7 deacons.
In the sense of the social mission of the parish, and even in the liturgy, you're serving the priest, you're setting the table, or you're doing all the things. Another meaning for deacon is waiter. I come among you to serve.
Exactly.
The table.
We talk about the table of the Eucharist, right? And if you watch what a deacon does, he's helping a priest. He's basically pouring the water into the wine, setting up the book, setting up where the host is, and handing the priest things and
doing the dishes
after, so to speak.
Yeah,
you don't want to but I mean, there's that element. If you really kind of watch what a deacon does, he's like a waiter, and if you look at his stole, it's kind of like the towel that a waiter would have in ancient times, right, to help clean up.
Even the priest is, every priest is a deacon.
Yes.
And we don't get that replaced by priesthood. Even a bishop is still a deacon. Even the Pope is still a deacon.
Is still a deacon.
And so it's, in a way, it's a wonderful symbolic of the underlaying of all ministry, which expressive of the ministry is Christ, is service.
And it's that, and that's why I think deacons are so important, and why I constantly tell deacons you need to be this, it's a fancy phrase we use, but an icon of the servant of Christ. You represent Christ the servant, The priest is representing Christ the priest, The priestly ministry is very different from the servant. The servant is supposed to be humble. The servant is supposed to be, stand behind the priest. If you ever watch me walk, I'm like Prince Philip was to Queen Elizabeth, 2 steps behind the priest, Cardinal Sean said in an ordination once, and I love this phrase, the words deacon and high maintenance should never be used in the same sentence. If you see a deacon out there as being high maintenance, you might want to call him on it.
So you began, I mean, it's quite a elaborate process or extended process.
Yeah.
I want to be a deacon the next week.
No, you have to
unlike the story in Acts where they seem to have done it rather quickly.
So I am, deacons are assigned to 2 ministries in the Archdiocese. I'm assigned to Ave Maria Parish in Linfield, but I'm also assigned to the formation program. So I'm involved
you're really involved in continuing
forming deacons. What you do is you inquire. If you want to ever go to bostondiaconate.org, you can find a little form to send an inquiry, and we reach out to you, and you fill out an application. Right now, we've finished applications for the coming year, and it's quite elaborate. You have to have recommendations from your priest, from your bishop, from the local bishop or Episcopal vicar, from people who work with you, people who know you. We vet you. We send you through a psychological evaluation. We talk to you or your wife. We meet you, and then we accept you into the program.
And in fact, your wife is a significant.
The wife is absolutely a significant part of this.
That's one thing.
The first year, she has to attend all the classes.
Yeah,
so it's a 4-year program of formation. We meet twice a week, 4 times, 1 time out of the month. We meet in person in Braintree. 3 times out of the month, it's online.
Yeah.
And yes, the wife has to go to, after the first year when she's gone to all the classes, she still has to go once a month.
Right.
She has to understand what she's getting.
That's right.
Because what we don't want,
A divorced.
yeah,
deacons,
you know, we want the wife to be comfortable
Yeah,
with what's
really,
happening.
yeah.
And, you know, we tell deacons, you know, your first sacrament was with
Right.
your wife.
The first place you're a servant is at
Yeah,
home.
exactly. And so it's important that everybody be on board with that. And in fact, every year before you advance throughout the 4-year program, your wife has to handwrite a letter to the Cardinal, the Archbishop of Boston, Cardinal Sean, saying that it's okay for him to proceed to the next level.
I had to do a similar thing. My wife had to write a letter to the Pope.
Oh, really? Oh, yeah.
Because only the Pope could ordain a married man.
Yeah, I mean,
Or get permission from that. Well, I know it's a rich, I mean, it's both theological formation and obviously practical formation, psychological, spirit. But what have you loved the most about being a deacon? What are the things that you look like a happy deacon? I don't know. when I watch you work.
you see, I seem to be happy.
But what's the most satisfying?
You know,
part
I
of
love
it?
preaching.
Yeah.
I love
No,
preaching.
You're good. You have a real gift there.
I love being with parishioners and people and trying hard to be Christ-like to them as much as I can and help them on their faith journey.
Yeah.
You know, and there's a preaching element to that I think people come and talk to me after I preach. And there's also that just basic human interaction level. you
Yeah,
know.
just this past.
And even at work, you know, deacons have to work, right? So while I was in work, people would come up to me.
Yeah, I bet. Once they know you're.
You know, and I baptized babies for people I worked with. And, you know, I've helped one young man who was getting married to a Catholic who wasn't, to understand what he was getting involved in and how to go about doing that. But just then other spiritual questions that might arise, you know. So it's that being out there with people and just interacting with them and trying to bring them closer to God.
And I've had a little of this experience because I'm married, but I suspect for you, there's a sense of accessibility because we're married men and stuff like that, and that's nothing that we have extraordinary priests, and it's not, you know, it doesn't mean that they're not accessible, but there's just this fact that we can understand that realm of life, which is obviously a significant place of
I think
our
too, you're in the
energy.
community a little more deeply.
Yeah, right.
I coached youth sports in the community. Some people know me in Linfield from
You've had
that. It's not uncommon, people will know me and not know the priests, and so, you know, their parent will be dying and they want me to come, and one of the things I can't do is the last rites, but I help facilitate that.
That's right.
So you can kind of see that in some ways, you know, I'm at the grocery store, I'm, you know, on the baseball field, I'm, you know, I'm in the library, I'm doing things that it kind of is more out there in the community.
That's right. And again, that's somewhat symbolic of the deacon, is the man in the world.
Yes.
And bringing the world, they say, bringing the Christ to the world, but also bringing the world to the church.
Exactly.
Look, unfortunately, we're just about
Really?
out of time. We could go on in a lot of different directions, but it's been wonderful.
This was a lot of fun.
Wonderful to hear your story, and blessings, continued blessings on your ministry. Now that you're retired, you're probably just going to fill out more of your time than you did before when you
absolutely.
had to work. So blessings and thank you. Thank you very much for joining us in this conversation. I hope you've been inspired by Deacon O'Shea's journey and his witness. And if you are a man of commitment to the church and interested in ministry, the diaconal ministry is one of the wonderful opportunities for a way to serve God in the church. So get in touch with Tom.
BostonDiaconate.org.
All right, there it is. Maybe we'll put that on the liners at the end of the program. But I've met some wonderful men over the last few years, and I'm excited about their life and work in the church. So God bless, and may the Lord be with you.